I have no doubt that we didn't know about the OU's xenocidal disposition. Keeping a secret within the Republic is next to impossible, let alone one of this magnitude. It was only a question of whether or not the documents would be on time. All it would take is a bureaucratic delay to damper relations even further. Why the hell did I promise delivery by tomorrow? Must be nerves. The humans definitely make me nervous. Their size and appearance notwithstanding, what I had learned about them has set me on edge. They've been in wars that make our conflicts look petty in comparison. Even before they entered their space age, they were doing battle with each other on a scale that was unheard of among Republic species. Even among the United Systems members, the humans were only topped in bloody histories by the Gaunt, and the history between the two species could best be described as murky. Apparently, the Gaunt had a civil war regarding whether or not they should join the United Systems. The U.S. sold arms to the side that wanted to join, which makes sense in a way, and resulted in that side winning. The two sides signed a treaty and joined the U.S. One would have expected that to be the end of it, but apparently the side that lost just bided their time. Then the humans had a civil war which lasted nearly 100 years, in which they developed a classified weapon to force a surrender. This worked, but testing of the weapon caused a plague that humanity is still trying to deal with. The Gaunt dissenters used this as justification to attempt a coup against their government, which failed. Their objective had changed from staying out of the United Systems to simply controlling the Gaunt government. However, since the Gaunt were part of the United Systems, the U.S. had to step in. The fighting was intense, with the Gaunt rebels resorting to terrorist tactics to subdue colonies under their control. The U.S. managed to fight them into surrender, only for them to try again 300 years later, and again 150 years later. But between the Second and Third Pacification War, the AI rebelled, which led to humanity creating yet another classified weapon. This weapon made short work of the Third Pacification War. Things were relatively peaceful until about 18 years ago, where the Gaunt rebels once again attempted a coup. They were successful in assassinating several members of the Gaunt government, but weren't able to finish the job. They also managed to infiltrate several U.S. vessels before they triggered the coup, and have been using terrorist and guerrilla tactics to wage a war of attrition against the remaining Gaunt officials and the U.S. Because of the constant issues with the Gaunt, humanity had become the de facto military force of the United Systems. By far and large, it is human forces that are laying down their lives on a Gaunt planets trying to restore peace. Personally, I had no idea how much of this was propaganda and how much is unadulterated truth. It doesn't exactly cast the U.S. in the best of lights, but I wonder if the atrocities committed and the bloodshed could be worse than they are telling me. The reason I wonder this is because it's customary to glaze over certain parts of one's history when meeting another species for the first time. The Urakari tend to not go into detail about our unification wars. The Duliki glaze over their uplifting of the Maltovariakina, and even the Juntor glaze over their horrifically failed attempts at genetic modification. But the human had presented me with a seemingly full history with actual casualty counts. On the other hand, so what? There wasn't a single government in the history of the Republic who hadn't done something that people would consider terrible. The thing is, if you look at the reasoning behind it while keeping your emotional reaction in check, you can see why they all did what they did. Even if it was stupid, even if it was callous, even if it was selfish and greedy, there was reasoning behind it. The Urakari unification wars resulted in our ability to join the interstellar community and vastly improved the quality of life for our citizens. The Duliki had uplifted the Maltovariakina so that they could trade resources with them instead of simply taking the resources. The Juntor had attempted genetic modification to better be able to relate to their galactic neighbors and escape the limitations of their biology. Sometimes things don't work out and don't have a happy ending, but that's part of growth. I decided that I wouldn't judge humans too harshly for whatever they were glazing over if and when I found out about it, unless it were something unforgivable such as xenocide. By the sun, the thought that the Omni Union was xenocidal hadn't even occurred to us. There were always factions within each species that would preach about xenocide as the optimal solution for interspecies strife, but those people were fucking crazy. Only a fool would allow a xenophobe to rule. Their policies inevitably damage economies and risk causing war, and even xenophobes would hesitate to wage a war of xenocide. Once it's realized that that's your goal, it's easy to gather support against you. Your enemies will fight with all of their might and none of their morals, because they're no longer simply defending their way of life. They're defending their very existence. I got a message confirming my request and decided to call it a night. It took me a bit to actually get to sleep. Unfamiliar beds always made my sleep a bit restless. Despite this, I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. I took a shower, put on clean clothing, and performed other acts of hygiene before finally checking my messages. To Ambassador Yuluni, Illyria 2. The request by the United Systems for a formal statement regarding the xenocidal disposition of the Omni Union has been fulfilled. Please see the attached document and confirm that it meets their criteria before presenting it to the representative of the United Systems. Your request for an action plan regarding permanent diplomatic relations with the United Systems has been approved and completed. Please present the secondary attached document to the representative of the United Systems for their feedback. From Diplomatic Corps Central Office, Senate City Attachments, Statement.txdr Action Plan.txt. I was surprised by how quickly things were moving along. The executive must be paying personal attention to this first contact. Not that I blame him. If it's mishandled, the U.S. may become a formidable opponent. Even the sale of the navigation tech, something which usually takes nearly a year to be approved, had been streamlined and approved in record time. On the other hand, I suppose it's not an equivalent situation to previous first contacts. First, both sides are actively at war with the same enemy. Second, and I keep forgetting this, we're not just dealing with the humans. We're dealing with 3 other species as well. I double-checked both documents to make certain that they were acceptable, then added my signatory code to them. Then I sent the documents to Director 3 along with a time for a meeting later in the day to discuss the documents if he had any questions. He immediately responded with a simple, "Thank you." I busied myself preparing answers to potential questions he may have until it was almost time for the meeting. I arrived at the meeting room 15 minutes early. He was already waiting inside. Was he just living in this room? Is he just stuck in the chair and too embarrassed to ask for help? Either way, it has a creepy effect. Hello, Ambassador Yuluni. I have submitted the Republic's response to the Directorate and Senate of the United Systems and have some questions regarding the Diplomatic Relations Action Plan, he said. Of course, I responded. I'm unfamiliar with the system outlined in the plan, Regara. Could you tell me more about it? I began my prepared response. Regara is the system in which we used to house the Interspecies Conflict Resolution Forum prior to giving the power to forcibly end conflict to Congress. Since then, it's become something of a trade system where many people go to buy and sell goods. The forum station has been maintained but isn't currently used. This is where our permanent diplomatic embassies will be. It is also where the Republic fleet that will be sent to Seoul is mustering. I meant more along the lines of the layout of the system, Director 3 explained. The plan doesn't indicate whether this system has planets or what type of star it has. I understand. It has a yellow sun and 4 planets outside of the habitable zone. It also has an asteroid belt and several planetoids, also too hostile for colonization, I said, trying not to be embarrassed. A yellow sun is good, and the inability to colonize is also a plus. We wouldn't want civilian ventures to interfere with diplomacy, Director 3 said with a slight chuckle. I had no idea what he meant, but didn't feel it would be wise to ask. However, he seemed to pick up on my confusion. There are several entities called corporations that occasionally act outside of governmental influence in an attempt to get wealthier. One of our fears is them attempting to colonize neutral territory in order to gain an edge on their competitors and causing a diplomatic incident, he explained. Has that happened before? I asked, trying to mask my shock. Twice so far. Different corporations, too. A human corporation and an Alamari corporation. The political fallout was taxing, he said. Back to the subject at hand, how many personnel are we allowed to bring aboard the station? The document doesn't say. Another one I was ready for. Right, we would ask that you keep the amount of personnel to a minimum until everything is figured out in full. Just the people that you need. Also, we will have to request that all personnel that you bring aboard the station are organic in nature, at least for now. No offense, Omega. None taken, the speaker said. I also noticed that there is an embassy for each individual Republic species, but only one for the United Systems. I wanted to know why that's the case before I sign off, Director 3 said. The embassies were already in place, with one extra in case of another first contact. We think it would be best to initially treat the United Systems as a singular entity, and if this becomes a sticking point, we can add more room to the station, I responded. Of course. Well, everything seems to be in order, he said as he pressed his finger to the tablet with the document on it, adding his signatory code. Omega and I will remain here until one of our ships arrive to pick us up in 2 days. We will then rendezvous with the Republic fleet in Regara. He stood. I'm certain he had left that chair at some point during his time on the station, but this was my first time seeing it and I was a little shocked by his height. He wasn't as tall as the Marines, but he was still taller than me by a head and a half. I shook the shock off and stood as well. Thank you for your visit, Director 3. I wish you safe travels, I said as I stood. It was a pleasure, Ambassador Yuluni, he responded as he left the room, followed by the 2 Marines. The Noel Baranil is one hell of a ship. She's been in service for 45 years and only been disabled once. Over the course of her life, she's had many modifications which have turned her into the absolute killing machine that she is today. She began life as an Oyan battleship, but over the course of her service became a blended flagship that perfectly resembles the melding pot that the Republic strives to be. There isn't a single species that's prohibited from serving aboard the Noel Baranil. In fact, all of them do. It's not exactly perfect harmony, but we get by. The occasional interspecies fight now and then, as well as the standard crew drama, keeps things nice and spicy. The fighting was usually between the Isolan and Daleki, but we would occasionally get confrontations between the other races as well. The most recent was a fight between a Kinran and a Junatur of all things. Other leaders might see this as a bad thing, but I see it as an inevitability. When different cultures are forced into close proximity with each other, there's bound to be misunderstandings and conflict. As long as they're handled appropriately, though, it gives birth to understanding and friendship. Of course, if it's mishandled, it can devolve into bitter blood feuds. But that's why I take a personal interest in making certain it's handled correctly. I chuckled to myself, remembering the confrontation between the Kinran and the Junatur. The 2 most docile species in the Republic laying into each other over the proper usage of a tool. They had ended up making up, and after their injuries were treated, even became friends. Such is the way of life in the Republic. I wonder about the so-called United Systems, though. The Noel Baranil had just finished repairs after our most recent battle with the OU, and we had been expecting to leap right back into battle when we got our current orders. Lead a fleet to an alien system to help defend it. I had been receiving intel packets daily ever since, and their contents have aged me considerably. The United Systems is a cooperative governing entity maintained by 4 species. They are more technologically advanced than we are, and seemingly more well-versed in galactic-scale conflicts than we are. After reading shiphead Yulina's reports on the aliens as well as their own explanations of their capabilities, I could only come to one conclusion about their request for our help. They intended to use us as number buffers, and perhaps even bullet sponges. I was a little sore about this, but it was also understandable. After all, we had dragged them into this conflict with our lackadaisical blind jump retreat policy. I knew that would bite us in the rear eventually. We were fortunate that they didn't ask us for anything more than a defense fleet. I felt the corners of my eyes lift in a smile. I wondered what their reaction would be to our 2 million vessels showing up in their system. They hadn't told us their exact fleet makeup, but they had informed us that they only had 50 million ships. Our fleets typically had 1 million ships, so theirs must only have 200,000 or so, maybe even 250,000. Fleet Head, Squad 4 has finished resupply and is standing by for orders. My second in command, Hendel, informed me. Good, have them continue to stand by until everyone is finished. Keep the FTLDs humming so we can jump immediately, I responded. This fleet had been a logistical headache to muster. It was primarily composed of 2 fleets with fillers from various other fleets to make up for prior casualties. My command, the Yanori, Rattling Blades fleet, as well as the Horus Mighty Hammer fleet, made up the bulk of the ships. Fleet leader Poulin had been sore about me getting the command of the combined fleet. Unfortunately for him, Yanori fleet had more ships than Horus fleet, and plus Poulin had been due for a leave anyway. I had decided to split the fleet into 4 squadrons of 500,000 ships and appoint commanders from within those squadrons. This would allow me to give orders more efficiently and keep us from stepping on each other's toes. A lack of proper delegation was poison for a large fleet. "How's Squad 1 doing?" I asked. Hendel took a moment to check before she answered. "They've nearly finished the installation of the U.S. TAC map on their command vessel and are about 3/4 done with resupply. We're on schedule." The United Systems Tactical Map, an absolutely ingenious tool of war that had actually alleviated most of my aversion towards leading a force this large. It uses a subspace communicator to sync ship sensors and display the information in an easy-to-access and user-friendly interface. It was like being able to see through the eyes of all your individual soldiers at once, or at least that will be the case once they're finished being installed. The Republic had purchased more than enough units, but we didn't have time to install them aboard every vessel. The plan is to install them aboard the command vessels, jump to Sol, then install them into individual vessels when we have the time. We would be doing this 100,000 ships at a time, so we would constantly have 1,900,000 fielded. Even with them only aboard the command vessels, it would give us a larger advantage than we've ever had over the OU. The Republic's TAC map relied on an individual vessel's own sensors to display information and only updated once every 3 seconds. And the interface was archaic and required special training to be able to use properly. There had been a lot of pressure to update the damned system, but the Senate always found something else to spend the budget on. But with this upgrade, our time to fire will drop because we'll be able to gather a firing solution quicker, and our shots will be more accurate because we'll actually know where the enemy is, rather than extrapolating their position. And with how intuitive it was, I didn't have to worry about my commanders having difficulty with it. I was excited to put it to use. "Fleet head, a U.S. destroyer just exited warp and is hailing us," Intel head Solon said. "Are they transmitting video?" I asked. "Yes, sir." "Return the favor and put them on screen," I ordered. A holodisplay flared into life and I was treated to a visual of an alien wearing black full-body armor. I recognized him from his description in the intel briefings I had received. "Director 3, I presume?" I asked. "Yes, I am here to coordinate with you regarding the defense of Sol," the armored human said. "Excellent. I don't like popping in without an escort," I said with a smile. I was briefly worried that he might not realize that I'm smiling. Most sentient species smile with their mouths, but Oyans smile with our eyes. Due to the beak. Thankfully, the human laughed, setting my mind at ease. "Yes, that's understandable. However, I'm unable to return to Sol with you. I will be jumping to a different system altogether." "My apologies," he said. "Not an issue worthy of an apology, Director. May I ask why?" "The United Systems has a specific doctrine regarding warfare against xenocidal threats. Due to my position as an upper echelon commander and Sol being the primary target of the aforementioned threat, I'm not allowed to enter the system until the threat is resolved," he responded. The intel regarding the United Systems had surprised and excited me. But then the intel regarding the OU came in. I wish I could say that the Omni Union being xenocidal came as more of a shock, but unfortunately that information perfectly answered a lot of questions that I had. Instead of being shocked, I had grieved for my brother who had been aboard one of the trade stations that the OU captured earlier in the war. I know it was foolish, but I had been holding out hope he was still out there somewhere. I consoled myself with the fact that I now had closure regarding his death, and my family would be able to have a funeral for him. "Understood. So what's the procedure going to be?" I asked. "Once you've finished your preparations, you will jump to coordinates that are outside of the system, where you will be hailed by Admiral Hecat or one of his subordinates. You will then be provided coordinates to your defensive position. You can then jump to those coordinates or approach via sublights, whichever is best for your vessels. Omega, please give them the coordinates, he said. It is done, another voice answered as a message appeared at my terminal. Omega, the human-made AI. I felt ambivalence towards the United Systems AI. On the one hand, they're incredibly dangerous beings that have already been at war with the US once. On the other hand, anything is incredibly dangerous given the right circumstances. Might as well just go with the flow, though. Thank you. Is Admiral Hecat our primary point of contact? I asked. Admiral Hecat or his designated officer is your point of contact for tactical purposes. For anything else, please contact shiphead Yulina of the RSV Loalana, Director 3 said. I stifled my grin and asked, You've got Yulina acting as a diplomat? Yes. We don't have a permanent diplomatic envoy assigned as of yet. Do you know the shiphead? Director 3 responded. He served under me in his first command before the Loalana was refitted as a scout ship. I laughed. He's definitely got a diplomatic spirit, but it would seem he considers that to be his biggest character flaw. Director 3 laughed as well. Well, I suppose he'll have to tough it out until the Republic is able to assign a replacement. It's important for our continued diplomatic relations that we are able to understand the context behind any requests, and he's in a unique position to be able to help us do that. Indeed. Well, we will be finished with our preparations within a day and a half if things continue to go as planned. I look forward to meeting Admiral Hecat and working with the United Systems, I said. Director 3 nodded and said, We look forward to working with you as well. Godspeed. As the holo display powered off, I once again laughed to myself at Yulina's expense. Yulina's father, High Commander Uliriona, was likely responsible for his current position. Uliriona was notorious for creative punishments and was known for being a harsh parent. He undoubtedly knew the exact buttons to push to make certain that his son got the proper amount of corrective action. Hell from on high was a phrase that was created to describe Uliriona's punishments. Standard punitive measures sometimes felt unfair, but I knew personally that whatever punishment you got from High Commander Uliriona was exactly what you deserved. I stopped laughing as I remembered having to scrub my own ship's latrines as a shiphead for undermining the authority of my commanding officer in front of junior officers. It had taken a decade for Hendel to let me live that down. Still, it had taught me a valuable lesson about authority and pride without relieving me of my command. If I had received the standard punishment, I doubt that I would be as effective of a commander as I am now. I might not even have become a fleet head. Sir, the U.S. vessel has entered warp and Squad 1 is finished with the installation of the TAC map. We can boot them up now, Hendel said. Good. Let's familiarize ourselves with the new toy, I said with a smile.